We just finished it. We've celebrated the goodness of God. We know the gift of the Savior. We know what it is to have Jesus have been given to us, and to know the love and the grace of God in an immense way. And I think it's a time as well to examine ourselves and our lives, a time to adjust the end of the year, to be encouraged, to be challenged, and to make necessary corrections. My biggest fear in life is that it goes like this, and I never change and grow. What? I'm not on? Okay. I was on? Let me take care of my tail here. Hold on. There we go. All right. Is that better? All right. Somebody's going, no, it was worse. It was quiet before. All right. But it's a time to, one of my big fears is you go like this and you never change. And change is never pleasant. Sometimes it's very painful. Other times it's just challenging. But I think we're here because we want to grow to be more like Jesus. And so we're going to dig in today and look at a couple of things. We're looking back, as you could tell from the reading of the Word, early Israel. They'd come out of the bondage of Egypt. Moses led them out into that. The plan A was to go straight to the promised land. And they went to the promised land, were getting ready to enter. They sent out spies, remember that? The spies came back and overall gave a bad report after spending 40 days in and through the promised land. They gave a bad report. And the people said, we want to go back to Egypt. God said, no. You're going to wander a year for every day they were there. A year for every day until you're all dead. Because what you said is, we're going to die in the wilderness and our kids will die in the wilderness. And what's going to happen is you're going to die in the wilderness and your kids will go into the promised land. Joshua was one of the faithful ones. They came in. Now, what happened is they entered the promised land. They started the conquering process. Joshua was faithful, and what we're reading is at the end of his life, right? And then we're reading the beginning of Judges, where the people started, they're in the promised land, but they started to go away from the Lord. Not a good place to be. And what I want to do is I want to lay out basically two possibilities of where you can be in your relationship with Christ and the consequences of those down the line. That's what I want to do. And I think they're highlighted in the passages we've read. One possibility you've got is to be like Joshua. What do you hear bad about Joshua? Not too much. Not too much. And I want to go over basically the accolade that's given to Joshua. He was someone that did the works of the Lord. He was engaged in doing what God gave to him. And sometimes it was great stuff. Sometimes it was small things. What did he do when Moses went up the mountain? Anybody remember? Moses went up to receive the law. What did he do? He just sat and stayed nearby. When Moses would go in the tent of meeting to meet with the Lord, what did Joshua do? He just sat nearby. How easy is it to sit nearby? I think that's hard. He did things like he was one of the spies that went in the promised land, and he brought a good report back. What was the other spy that brought a good report? Ooh, you guys are good. You've been reading your Bible through. That's good. Absolutely. Caleb was one of them. And so we know, and the description of him that I think fits him the best is right here. Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died. You know, I don't know many of us that look for that accolade. I certainly don't. I mean, you know, Steve, the servant of Halozyme during the week, I'm like, or even servant and renew, it's sort of like, yeah, but there's more. But this is the highest praise there is. Servant of the Lord. As a matter of fact, Paul, in writing in the New Testament, he would call himself a bond slave of Jesus. A bond slave is somebody with no will of their own of Jesus. I'm like, man, I want to assert my will. And Paul, as strong-willed as he was, because if you read about him, was he strong-willed? He says, I'm laying down my will, and I'm the slave of Jesus. And this is a high accolade. He was a servant of the Lord, which means that he laid down his will and he did the works of God, period. That's what he did. In Numbers 13 and 14, I already said he and Caleb went into the promised land, and they went into it to spy it out. They went in with eyes of faith. They saw the giants. They saw the enemy and how entrenched their cities might be, but they also knew God. They'd seen God bring them out of Egypt and destroy Pharaoh's army. And what did the children of Israel do to get that victory? Nothing. So is God able? And they knew it. And so he was faithful in that part. He followed God's strange commands. Think about this. Got a mighty army. We're crossing into take over this new promised land. The first city that we go to is a pretty fortified city. Name of the city? Jericho. You guys are good. Jericho. And God says, here's how I want you to attack Jericho. I want you to go up on the hill here. I want you to bring that. No, how does he tell them to attack it? He says, what I want you to do is once a day, I want you to go march around it. And don't say a word. Then the seventh day, what I want you to do is I want you to go around it 7 times, not saying a word, and then I want you to turn and everybody shout. Okay, God. And they did it, and what happened? And who obeyed God in that? Joshua did. He did what God told him to do. After that, they went and they were going to take the next city, Bethel, and it was going to be an easy one. Or yeah, it was going to be an easy one. And so they just sent part of their troops, and what happened? They got routed. And then what's up? Something's wrong here. So they come back and they cast lots, and they find out that this man named Achan had kept some silver and kept some things. And God was not going to bless them because of that. And Joshua made the difficult decision, but the one that had to be made, to punish that to the max, because this is somebody that offended God. He was the servant of the Lord doing the works of God. Maybe he could be timid too. Do you think he could be timid? He sounded bold at a lot of points, but 2 times at the end of Deuteronomy and the beginning of Joshua, we see God say something like this: the Lord gave this command to Joshua, son of Nun, be strong and courageous, for you'll bring the Israelites into the land I promised them on oath, and I myself will be with you. Twice, be strong and courageous. You don't tell that to somebody that's strong and courageous. You tell that to somebody that might have the tendency not to be. So maybe that was part of where he was, but boy, you couldn't tell it from looking at it, because he did what God told him to do, right? And then we see he had times of failure. Any of you ever remember the Gibeonites? They were one of the ites in the Bible. And that they were told to conquer and to destroy the people that were in the promised land. And these men of Gibeon set up a ruse. So what they did is they were in the promised land, but they put on old messed up clothes, torn, and got old crumbly, moldy bread, and they came and they saw they came to the elders of Israel and said, we come from a far country, make a covenant with us, blah, 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 and they didn't seek the Lord. And so the children of Israel made a covenant with them not to destroy them. And so they became drawers of water and servants of them, but they weren't destroyed. They did not seek the Lord. That's plainly said in there. So he may have his times of error too, right? But overall, he was a servant of the Lord, period. And I love what Jonathan read, and sometimes I go in houses and I'll see this up as a sign in some of the houses. It goes, choose for yourselves this day who you will serve, whether the gods or your forefathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. He said this to a group of rebellious people. And he knew it. He stood out in front. He had boldness. This is somebody, how old is he? 110. Beth, your aunt's visiting, right? She's how old? She's a junior. 110. She's got fire too. Joshua had fire. He's going, he knew what they were going to do. He knows their character. And he stands up and goes, look, choose for yourselves this day who you're going to serve. Don't play games with it. But as for me and my house, we've planted our flag. We're not going anywhere. We're serving the Lord. I love to see old people with fire. Because some people, life wears them down and there's nothing left. And they sit around waiting to die. Lord, spare you from that. But man, I love to see somebody that's been through the fire, that's paid the price, that's planted the flag, and they go, you can say what you want. Is that the best you can do? I'm serving the Lord, period. That's who I'm serving. And this was Joshua. He was a servant of the Lord. He had done what God commanded. He was a servant. And now you flip to the second possibility. The second possibility are those that see and hear the works of God. They're nearby. They've seen it. They've heard it. And that's the extent of it. We have some folks like that we see it in Judges 2:7. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen the great works of the Lord. Right? And then we see it again in Joshua 24:31. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua and had known the deeds of the Lord. They'd seen, they'd known, they did not doubt it, but it never really engaged that deeply in them. They had a problem following. You know people like that, don't you? I know pastors like that they can quote scripture, they can tell you the theology, and I wouldn't follow them anywhere because their hearts and their lives haven't changed. That's a deadly place to be. And I see it sometimes in families where the mom and dad are on fire for Jesus, and yet the kids never catch that fire, and they grow up. And so they go to church. They make sure the kids are there. They may even make sure they read the Bible at night. They may make sure they do this. They may read through the Bible 30-something times. Who knows? Whatever. It doesn't matter. They see and they know, but it never penetrates here, period. And that's a sad place to be. It's a sad place to be. They know all of those things, but they don't make that step from knowing to serving. And friends, I want to tell you, that's a place where maybe some of you are. I've been there in my life. I've been there in my Christian life. There have been times where that you're going like this and you're growing, and then there comes a point where you see and you know, but it just doesn't really penetrate, and I'm having a hard time even caring. And it's time to not settle there. Because with Joshua on fire, servant of the Lord, the generation that was there, that was his contemporaries, saw and knew, but it never hit. It never penetrated. And Joshua knew it. He looked at them and he tells them here, what does he say to them? when they say we want to follow the Lord, what does he say? You're not able. He knew them. Why would they be able? Because they only heard and saw. They never really believed and banked on it. They had tepid faith. They weren't the risk takers. By the way, when you have faith in Jesus, do you take risks? Yeah. Absolutely. Because if you're living by faith, it is a risk. Am I going to trust what God says here, or am I going to trust the way I feel? How many times? Over and over again, there's that challenge. And what it reminds me of is the parable of the soils. The parable of the soils, there are 4 soils, right? And the seed is thrown on the path, boom, take it away. The seed is thrown on the stony ground, boom, doesn't really have root, and it goes. The seed that falls on the really good ground, boom, 30, 60, 100-fold, it goes. The one that always gives me trouble is the one that falls among the thorns. Because I'm sitting there going, are these believers? The first 2, we know they're never believers. But that third one is sound just like me sometimes. It's thrown among thorns, and it seems to be doing pretty good, and you want to cheer it on. But the scripture says in Mark's version of that 3 things happen that basically, well, I'll show you here, that the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desire for other things choke it, and it becomes unfruitful. I go, that sounds like these children of Israel. And they knew. They had God there in their midst. And yet, it was always the worries. Always the worries. It was always Achan, the silver was there. Why wouldn't you take it? Who would know? It's always the desire for other things. I want to be like these people that were going around. Why do I want to settle for this? They seem to be doing pretty well, and they serve a different God. Why would I want to just add that one to it? That's all that takes. Why don't we do that? And it sounds an awful lot like this parable of the soils. And I hate doing funerals for people that are stuck there. Hopefully, you're not. But I never quite know whether I can say they're at peace or there's hell to pay. I never know. And I don't want that said. I don't want it said about me. It's a dead faith. It's a faith that makes absolutely no difference. Wouldn't that be sad? I mean, you come to a point, you understand things about God, you do this, you make this declaration of faith, and that faith makes this much difference in your life and in the lives of others. And yet, I think there are a lot of people in American churches that have that kind of faith. And it's a time maybe for us to check and go, is that my tendency? Do I let stuff crowd Jesus out? Do I let worries crowd him out? Do I let, if only I had a little more here, I'd give? Do I let the desire for other things? I know Jesus is right and he's true, but he really loves me. Come on. Is this where we live? And it can be. And there's no inspiration for anybody else. So they have a faith, but it's not a faith that makes any difference. And quite frankly, I think it's a faith that the result of it is their children said what? I don't want that. I don't want that. And then walk away from it all. That's what we see with the children of Israel, isn't it? The next generation. It says the next generation here, arose a new generation, another one after them, who did not know the Lord or yet know the works which he had done. They didn't know him because they never saw him through their parents. They never saw him. And they hear all this religious talk and they see nothing in their lives and they go, this is garbage. I don't want this. I'm going to go live my own life. People in the nations around me, their gods are just as good as this one. And so that's what they did. How did that go for them? Went horrible. It went horrible. Period. Period. There was a spiritual longing in them because God put a spiritual longing in us. He put that there. I think it was Augustine said our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. Talking about God, but our hearts are restless. And so I think as a result of our hearts being restless, we try to find meaning in other places. Sometimes it can be alcohol or drugs. Sometimes it can be human relationships. Sometimes it can be other religions. But we're going to try to find it somewhere. And I think the danger in the church is if we don't have a genuine act of faith, maybe it's our kids, maybe it's our neighbors, are looking and going, look, I want to find that meaning, but it's certainly not going to be where you found it because you don't have it. You're fooling somebody, you think, but you're not. And they go on elsewhere. And the positive that can happen with that is I've also heard ones with young kids where their parents have dead faith. They go, that's dead, but my grandmother. But my grandmother. And they're going to maybe be drawn to something genuine rather than that tepid, impactless faith of that other generation. Period. But if you have a faith that's on fire, I think there's a positive aspect as well. It's not here in the Old Testament where we were looking. I'm going, it's not here in the text. I'm not going to put it there. We're going to talk about two people in the New Testament. The first one is Timothy. What do you know about Timothy?
Father was Greek.
Father was Greek. Mother was Jewish. Was he a believer?
Yes.
Absolutely. And Paul mentored Timothy. As a matter of fact, in discipling relationships, sometimes they say, you need to have a Paul-Timothy relationship with somebody. Somebody's older, mentoring, somebody's younger, being mentored, blah, blah, blah. Paul mentored Timothy. In 2 Timothy, his last letter, he writes this to Timothy. He goes, I've been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded now lives in you also. He didn't say tepid faith, did he? He didn't say lukewarm faith. These people were servants of the Lord. And he saw it, and it was there in Timothy. And the thing about Timothy is later, he became the pastor in Ephesus. He became the pastor in Ephesus, and we know that. He was there a good while. And it's recorded, he was martyred as an old man. Now listen to this. There's this festival of Katungin or whatever for Dionysius, the Greek god. And Dionysius was the god of light, wine, and revelry. Think Mardi Gras on steroids. Okay? And so they were marching in this procession, and marching was sort of, it was fairly lewd stuff and all of this. And he goes up to them in the front of this crowd, and he's an older man now. And he goes, basically, let me see if I can get the words exactly. Men of Ephesus, do not be mad for idols, but acknowledge the one who truly is God. And they beat him and killed him. An old man. He had fire. He had fire. And that came through, did it not? And it started where? In another generation who had fire. And it carried through. They didn't let it get watered down. Another one that we're going to look at is John Mark and in Acts. Well, there we go. And it's not 2 Timothy 1:5. John? Okay. There we go. In Acts 12. In Acts 12, it said, when this had dawned on him, Peter, He went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. The reason I put that in there, and the reason I know you know that Mary had sincere faith, is how safe was it to be a Christian? They were starting to persecute the Christians. Peter had been put in prison. They were going to kill him. The Jews were. The Romans were. And Mary says, let's have a prayer meeting at my house. She's putting herself at open risk. And she's John Mark's mother, and I know John Mark saw genuine faith. I know that. John Mark later was sort of timid, was he not? He went on the first missionary journey with Paul and Barnabas. He made it to Cyprus, which was their what stop? First. And at the end of the first stop, he was like, I'm out of here. And he took off and went back. Paul and Barnabas wanted to go back and revisit the churches they'd been to, and Barnabas says, let's take John Mark, and Paul says, we don't know the exact words, but it'll be over my dead body. And so they had such a sharp disagreement that they split. Barnabas took John Mark and went. Paul and Silas took Silas and they went. The next you start hearing about John Mark is he was around Peter a good bit. And basically the Gospel of Mark, most would say, is more just about the Gospel of Peter. Peter's contact with John Mark and the things that God inspired and he wrote. And later on, Paul writes and he says John Mark's useful to him for service. There had been a reconciliation there. What we do know about John Mark after that was he went to Alexandria in Egypt, which was ended up being a thriving Christian community. And in a very similar way, he ticked the pagans off there, and they drug him through the streets with ropes and hooks until he was almost dead. He wasn't, so they dragged him again, and he died because of his faith. He had fire. And what I love about John Mark is, did he fail? Yeah, there was a point where the fire went out, it looked like. And he was going to go back to tepid faith, and something happened in him, and he said no, and God opened his eyes. I don't know all the details, but he ran after God, and he never stopped. Never stopped. And friends, I put this out here today because I'm concerned, always as a pastor. I love you guys. And my big fear is that you will get to a point in life and you'll settle and you'll have tepid faith because you've been disappointed in God, maybe, with things that you've risked. Or you've seen other people out there, they do just as well without Jesus and the way things look. And so you back away. And you still come to church, you may still give, you may still do all kinds of things, but the heart disconnects, and you're content with seeing and knowing, but not doing, and being a servant. And God's called every one of us to be a servant of His. And if you get a handful of servants together, can the world be changed? Can Fort Myers be changed and Cape Coral? Absolutely. Alva. Absolutely. And a generation can be raised after us that plants the flag and says, I'm standing here. No more else. That's our call.